Have you ever had someone try to take away something you love most? Imagine this: you're peacefully living your life, caring for your rescue animals, when suddenly an HOA Karen shows up at your door with one goal: evicting your beloved pets. Sounds like something out of a nightmare, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. It all started when I adopted a few rescue animals, each with their own heartbreaking story. They weren't just pets, they were family. But when the HOA caught wind of my growing animal family, they weren't happy. They claimed I was violating some obscure rule that no one seemed to remember ever being enforced. The tension was thick as they threatened to take my animals away. As the HOA Karen came at me with demands, I knew I had to fight, but I wasn't sure how. This wasn't just about rules, it was about standing up for the creatures who had nowhere else to go, and with every passing day, the pressure mounted. What did I do next? How far would I go to protect them? You won't believe the twist that came next. Stay tuned as the battle continues, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The HOA had always been strict, but until then, they'd never really bothered me. I'd lived in the neighborhood for years, quietly going about my business. I had a few animals, sure, but nothing too unusual. A dog here, a cat there. But when I started adopting more rescues, each one coming from a rough background, things changed. Suddenly, my quiet little corner of the world wasn't so peaceful anymore. The first warning came in a letter, slipped into my mailbox one morning. It was vague, but the tone was clear. I was violating some rule about excessive pets and unsightly conditions. No specifics, no details. Just a vague threat that I could face fines, or worse, be forced to remove my animals. I wasn't going to let that happen. These were my rescues, my responsibility. I decided to fight back, but I wasn't prepared for the relentless pressure that followed. The HOA Karen, as I began calling her in my head, started showing up at all hours, knocking on my door or leaving more notes. Each interaction was more hostile than the last. She'd even taken to driving by my house, staring at my yard like she was waiting for me to slip up. It didn't feel like a simple issue of rules anymore. It felt personal. What was she really after? And what would she do next to make sure my animals were gone? The tension was building, and I could sense something bigger was coming. As the days went on, it became clear that this wasn't just about the pets. It was about power, control, and something deeper I couldn't quite understand. Every time I'd try to reason with the HOA Karen, she'd just get more aggressive, throwing around vague threats about fines and legal action. I tried to talk to other neighbors, hoping for some support, but most of them either pretended not to notice or subtly backed away when I brought it up. It was like no one wanted to get involved, and I was left to face this alone. Then things started to escalate. One afternoon, I came home to find a notice taped to my door from the HOA. It was a formal warning, saying they had received multiple complaints from neighbors about my excessive animals and uncontrolled property. The complaint was signed anonymously. I knew who was behind it, but it felt like a punch in the gut to see it all in writing. I began to feel the walls closing in. The stress was starting to affect my animals too. My dog, who was usually calm and collected, had started barking nonstop every time the HOA Karen drove by. My cats, normally happy to lounge around, were on edge, hiding in corners and avoiding the windows. It was like the tension was seeping into everything. And then came the phone call. It was from a lawyer, someone the HOA had hired to take legal action. The sound of his voice on the other end made my stomach drop. They weren't going to back down. They wanted to take me to court. I was running out of options and time was running out. Would I have to give up my animals? Would the HOA win this battle, or was there something I could do to fight back? I didn't know, but I knew this wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The pressure was unbearable now. Each morning, I'd wake up to a new note, a new threat, or worse, a sight of the HOA Karen standing by her car, watching me through my window. I couldn't even walk my dogs around the neighborhood without feeling like I was being judged, scrutinized. My animals had started to sense it too, the tension in the air. My dog would cower every time the Karen's car pulled up. My cats, who usually ran to greet me, stayed hidden, no doubt feeling the fear I couldn't escape. The lawyer's call haunted me. It was clear the HOA wasn't going to stop. If anything, they were ramping up their attacks. I had to find a way out, but each option seemed more desperate than the last. I thought about hiring my own lawyer, but the cost would be astronomical, and what if I lost? Could I really face the idea of losing my rescue animals? The thought kept me up at night. I started researching the HOA rules, digging through every document I could find. I called anyone who might know something about the laws governing these kinds of disputes, trying to find a loophole, something that could give me a fighting chance. Every time I thought I was getting closer, I hit another dead end. The laws felt like they were rigged against me, designed to protect the Karen and her followers, not people like me. Then, one afternoon, I got a phone call from a neighbor who had witnessed something disturbing. Apparently, the HOA Karen had been going door to door, trying to get other residents to file complaints against me. She was building a case, trying to gather evidence to force me out. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about pets, it was personal. She wasn't going to stop until she destroyed everything I'd worked for. I could feel the walls closing in, and I knew that if I didn't act soon, it might be too late. What would I do now? How far would I go to protect my animals? The moment of truth was coming, and I had no idea how it would end. Just as I was preparing for my next move, trying to find a way to fight back against the HOA Karen and her growing power, something unexpected happened. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I received a mysterious letter. It was different from the usual threats. It was handwritten and had no return address. Inside, there was a single sentence: "I know who's behind this." My heart raced. Who could be sending me this? And what did they know? I immediately thought of the neighbor who had tipped me off about the Karen's door-to-door complaints, but this didn't feel like their style. The message seemed to be a warning, or perhaps an offer of help, but from whom? And what did they expect in return? I spent the entire night trying to figure it out, my mind spinning in a million directions. By morning, I decided to take a risk and follow the only lead I had. I reached out to a few local animal rescue groups, hoping they might have information on the HOA's history. What I uncovered shocked me. It turned out the HOA Karen had a past, a dark one. Years ago, she'd been involved in a similar battle, one where she'd used her position to target people who kept animals that didn't fit her narrow idea of acceptable. But the real bombshell came when I learned that this wasn't just about animals. The HOA Karen had something to gain from removing certain families, financial leverage, maybe even property deals in the works. It wasn't about rules. It was about power and control, and I realized I was in way deeper than I had imagined. The deeper I dug, the more I understood that the stakes were much higher than I'd thought. This wasn't just a fight for my pets. It was a fight for everything I had built, and the Karen was prepared to stop at nothing to destroy it. I couldn't back down now. But what would I do? How far would I have to go to stop her? The answers were becoming more elusive, but I knew one thing for sure. This battle was about to get a lot more intense. The days leading up to the court hearing were some of the hardest of my life. I had my lawyer ready, but it felt like a losing battle. The HOA Karen had all the power. As the date loomed closer, I spent countless hours organizing evidence, gathering testimonies from neighbors who were willing to speak up, and preparing myself for what was sure to be an emotional, exhausting fight. On the morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse, heart pounding. But something unexpected happened. Just before I was about to walk in, I received a text message from an anonymous number. "Meet me at the back door. I have something you need to see." The text was chilling, but I had no choice. I had to follow this lead, whatever it meant. I slipped around the back of the courthouse, and there, standing in the shadows, was the person who had sent me the message, the same neighbor who had warned me about the Karen's tactics. But they weren't alone. The neighbor handed me a folder, and my stomach dropped when I saw what was inside. It was a series of documents that exposed the Karen's financial ties to a real estate development project in our neighborhood. She had been trying to clear out certain families to make room for developers, and my animals were just a pawn in her game. It was all coming together. The fight had never been about rules. It had always been about money. The Karen didn't care about pets or property lines. She was using her position to manipulate the HOA for her personal gain. Armed with this information, I went into the courtroom, determined to expose the truth. As I presented the documents, I saw the surprise in the faces of the HOA board members. The Karen's smug smile faltered, but just as I thought I had won, she pulled her final card. She accused me of falsifying the evidence, claiming it was a desperate ploy to save my pets. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, the judge called for a recess. My heart sank. Had I gone too far? Was I really going to lose everything? But then the unexpected twist hit. As we were stepping out of the courtroom, my lawyer received an urgent phone call. The judge had requested a private session with the HOA board. It turned out there was more to the story than we knew. The HOA Karen wasn't just facing legal consequences for her actions. She had personal connections to the board that were now being investigated for corruption. The weight of the moment hit me. This wasn't just a victory for my animals. It was a victory for everyone who had been silently manipulated by the HOA. The Karen's web of lies was beginning to unravel, and as we left the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. But then, as I looked over my shoulder, I noticed something that made my heart race. A car parked across the street, with a figure inside watching me closely. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. As I walked away from the courthouse, my heart still pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't truly over. But when I turned to look again, the car had disappeared. I didn't know who was behind the wheel, but I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The Karen's grip on the HOA was loosening, and that was the real victory. In the weeks that followed, everything started to change. The HOA board members began to distance themselves from the Karen, and a full investigation was launched into her actions. It wasn't long before the real estate deals she had been involved in came under scrutiny. As for my animals, the judge ruled in my favor, and I was able to keep my rescue pets without any further interference. The relief was overwhelming. Looking back, I realized how much this experience had taught me about resilience and the importance of standing up for what's right. It wasn't just about protecting my animals. It was about fighting back against injustice, no matter how powerful the opponent seemed. And while I still didn't know who had been watching me that day, I felt ready for whatever came next. The battle had been hard, but it was worth every step. My animals were safe, and the truth had come to light.